Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Barnyard Broadcast. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about manure and odor management. I am very excited to talk on this topic today because I feel as if sometimes as producers, we don't think about this topic enough. Our guests today for this episode are Dr. Bob Mikesell, Dr. Robb Meinen, and Brady Seeley. I'm very excited to get into today's episode, so without further ado, let's get into the conversation. Hello, everybody. My name is Maddie Workler, your host. We like to get started with today's episodes with a little bit of some introductions. So, Bob, you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure. My name's Bob Mikesell. I'm a teaching professor in the animal science department at Penn State. And when I'm not teaching, I'm working with the Pennsylvania Odor Management Program. Got started with this way back in the early 2000s, maybe even a little bit before that, when I was asked to go out to some farm sites and take a look at them from an odor standpoint. And we've kind of developed a program from there.
Sweet. Brady, would you like to take it away next?
Absolutely. I'm Brady Seeley. I am the director of the Nutrient Management, Odor Management, and Manure Hauler and Broker programs for the Pennsylvania State Conservation Commission. I've been with the commission for about 5 years in various roles in our nutrient management, odor management programs. I've also worked for a local county conservation district in Cumberland County. And then I also grew up on a small family dairy farm in Bradford County.
Hello, everybody. I'm Robb Meinen. I have been at Penn State for just over 25 years, and I've worked with manure and odor issues that whole entire time. I've had some previous background in the swine industry before coming to Penn State. I am the director of the Pennsylvania Nutrient Management Education Program and have the title of Assistant Research Professor in the Department of Plant Science at Penn State.
Perfect. Sounds good. So I'm going to start off with asking a pretty broad question, so you guys can go at it however that you think is the best. But the first question I wanted to ask was, how should a producer go about proper manure and odor?
Well, I can start off with a few comments on that. First off, the producer should know what type of farm they are as far as categories go within the state. There are different management plans, one being a nutrient management plan versus a manure management plan in the state. Most farms need a manure management plan, but some farms with a large number of animals or a high density of animals per acre need the Act 38 nutrient management plan. If you're not sure about what type of plan is needed, just contact your conservation district because the district has specialists at every county that can help you figure that out.
I'll just jump in, Rob. Just let our audience know that this is a Pennsylvania-based discussion, and these laws and rules and guidelines are going to vary depending on what state or country you're in. But Pennsylvania's been pretty progressive in this area, and I think we've got a pretty good set of rules that we run with.
Now, I'll kind of add to build on what Rob said. Once you kind of know which plan you need, based on your category of operation, then knowing some various other information such as how much manure is generated, the type of manure, nutrient content, your available crop acreage, that all comes into play when it comes to proper utilization of the manure. And another key component of that would be a producer understanding setbacks from environmentally sensitive areas and application limits. These will all help a producer stay in compliance, and they will also get the most value for the manure then at that point.
It's pretty impressive how these plans couple along with education and producers themselves buying into proper manure and nutrient fertilizer utilization and efficiencies. And there are some good indicators I've seen recently where our water quality is improving, the agricultural impact on the environment is improving. So that's always a good thing to see.
So you guys have been talking a little bit just here in this first few minutes about manure management plans. That's something I just keep hearing. So what are some basic steps that producers can follow to create a manure management plan or get started, or even the basic things that they need before they start writing a plan?
Well, as we noted, the largest number of farms in Pennsylvania would need the manure management plan, and people can write that themselves. You do not need a certified individual to do that. There is a learning curve, and the DEP has information on their website, Department of Environmental Protection at the state level, and it's called the Clean Water Academy. You can go there, and there's learning videos and there's materials that would allow somebody to self-teach themselves how to write this manure management plan. It's not that complicated when you dive into it. A lot of it is self-guiding if you get into it and really look at it, but you have to be willing to take some time and organize yourself. You have to understand what your maps are like, what your fields are, your acreages, your animal numbers, how much manure you're producing, and you also have to couple that then with the crop side, right? Because a lot of times in the animal science world, we don't think a lot about the crop side, but when we feed something in the front end of the animal, that back end becomes important because we want to utilize that manure agronomically, economically, and then if we follow the manure management plan, we can get those two benefits out of it and also environmentally lower risk on how we impact the environment. The nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium manure is very, good for us. But if that nitrogen and phosphorus goes beyond the edge of the field, we've lost it. It doesn't bring us any more economic or agronomic value. And that's really what we want with the manure. We want to maintain it and keep it in the field, place it on the landscape in a manner in which it will infiltrate the soil and get to the roots, and then the crop can utilize it.
I'll add a little bit there because Rob kind of spoke about the producer being able to develop the manure management plan themselves, which is very true. This was designed so that way producers can develop the plan themselves. But there's also a lot of assistance out there that can be utilized to help a producer develop their plan. Rob mentioned earlier your local county conservation district. They are a very great tool. They can help write the plan with a producer one-on-one. They also do one-day workshops where they will help a group of operators to develop their manure management plan. And then there's also commercial consultants out there that will develop manure management plans, or it's more specifically the Act 38 nutrient management plans for operations that fall in that category. For the manure management side of things, manure management plan side of things for the commercial consultants, they're utilized a lot on your larger scale operations that kind of they're a larger operation, but they're not quite to the point where they're concentrated, where they need an Act 38 nutrient management plan, but their manure management plans, though simple, can become very complex and require some sort of technical expertise in order to develop plans for larger scale.
I'll just jump in here, just back up a second. The basic premise of this whole thing is to take a look at how much manure you're producing, what the nutrient content of that manure is, and matching that with the nutrient needs of the plants that are out there on the landscape on whatever fields that we're applying it to. So there's some balancing and some mathematics involved here. And we've got book values for manure nutrient content, but the best practice would be to actually test the manure to find out how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are there. And then we can apply it correctly and make sure that it doesn't get beyond the field's edge, as Rob said.
I'm thinking about the audience of the Barnyard broadcast, and I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast will have animals on pasture, right? So this balance that Bob's talking about pertains to pasture lands as well. And our experts at the State Conservation Commission sponsored county conservation districts are very good. They can visit your farm and look at places where your balance of nutrients may or may not be appropriate in the pasture. And some of those places that don't have a lot of vegetation often have an over application nutrients. So we call those animal concentration areas. So we need to think about those areas around a hay ring, around a gate or a stream crossing, and make sure that we're keeping manure pulled off of those things and managing our animals so that the animals deposit nutrients where we want them, right? We want nutrients deposited and moved to areas where we have growing grass, where we have forage and can get quality and benefit from the nutrients in the manure that the animals are depositing for us. So that's always something to think about. Every farm and every field is going to be a little different on that aspect. So take a critical look at your own lands and think about what's going on there and how can you manage your animals and manage your system so that the manure nutrients are driving into the forage roots and helping your forage grow. We also are seeing some issues on overestimation of pasture yield, right? A lot of times, some of our plants come in with yields that are at 5 or 6 tons per acre, and in reality, the pasture yields are often much lower than that. So, in that shell game of I can put nutrients here or not, sometimes we see people that over apply nutrients with their animals. So, you have to really think about that quality of stand in your pasture.
So I'm hearing a lot of good things about, the manure management plan itself. So if I was a producer, I'm hearing a lot of information and places. There's mention of a place I could get some step-by-step for starting a manure management plan. So if I was a producer and I was starting to write, Bob mentioned math, which he knows specifically that I'm really bad at. So if I had a question halfway through writing a plan or doing those sort of things, where would be the best place to go for information, and kind of what's the chain of command for information or just manure management in general?
The spot we mentioned was a DEP Clean Water Academy. That's a good starting point because there you can get the information so that you at least can dive into it a little bit to formulate good questions. And then from there, there are lots of sources. Again, the County Conservation District is a great resource to go to. You can come to any of us at Penn State and the nutrient management team. We have an email, nutrientmanagement@psu.edu. You can send questions to that, and our team will sort those out and answer those appropriately. You can go to the Conservation Commission. I'm speaking on behalf of Brady here, but I think those are good starting points.
I had some questions about, public and producer interactions, because sometimes, and I've known since I've been an extension agent, I've gotten questions about this. I guess, what is the best way to interact with the public about, odor management? So some of these farms that we in Pennsylvania here definitely butt up against places where there's lots of houses. So how would you guys go about, forging that relationship?
The interface between agriculture and, suburbia is always a problem and has been for years. We've got this manure that oftentimes doesn't smell very nice to people, that needs to be spread on fields that are adjacent to homes. And there are some ways that we've established through research to mitigate that conflict, at least partially. And one of the things that we really recommend that producers do is actually get to know their neighbors, know who people are, sit down and have a conversation with them, talk to them about why that manure needs to go on that ground and, what the benefit of those nutrients is. There's some other things that they can do in terms of applying that manure at a good time, in a way that the odors aren't going to bother those neighbors any more than absolutely necessary. Things like applying it, and just back up a second, the more liquid the manure is, the more the odor is going to be, the more intense and disagreeable the odor is going to be. So we don't get too many complaints from solid manure application, but we do get a lot of complaints from liquid manure application. So applying that liquid manure when it's going to dry out very quickly is a best practice. Applying it during the day, during the week when people tend to be at work and not at home, those types of things can go a long way to reducing that kind of conflict. Avoiding holidays. I've heard stories about somebody having a wedding at a house and the neighbor spreading manure the day before, and that doesn't go over very well. And that type of thing could have been avoided just with communication. So knowing who those neighbors are, having that two-way street of conversation that can happen. Hey, I've got a an event coming up this weekend. Could you please not spread manure on the field beside my house? And the vast majority of producers are going to appreciate that and not do it. So we've got some techniques, and most of them revolve around communication and just being upfront and being neighborly and knowing your neighbors. That's really important.
I'll kind of add there also with some context. So Pennsylvania currently does not have any sort of regulation with regards to odor and manure application. There's nothing regulating the odor that comes from manure application. Our Act 30 odor management program specifically regulates odor generated from animal housing manure storage facilities on operations that are considered concentrated, and that the other criteria is that these animal housing facilities, manure storage facilities, need to be new or expanded construction. So I just wanted to kind of provide a little bit of context there and background, just so that way the listeners kind of understand that there are some regulations in place when it comes to odor, but generally, like Bob said, the majority of complaints come from the spreading of the manure and the odors that generates, but there's nothing in place currently that regulates that.
A subtle thing that I found can help is just the language you use. Talk to neighbors, and then amongst your own crew, right? Your employees, your family. If you're all talking the same language, that really helps. So messages that get into the community as you become a good neighbor and act as a good neighbor. We manage our animals in the best of welfare. Welfare is a very big concern of ours. We need our animals to be happy and healthy so that we have efficient animals. Part of that is the feeding program that we put in the front end of the animal, and part of the byproduct of raising good meat, milk, and eggs is the manure product, and we utilize that to recycle the nutrients back into the soil to grow our crops, to keep the green space in the neighborhood, to give us all this open space and green fields that we all like in our neighborhood. And part of the price of that is sometimes we have to put that manure out on the field, and for a day or two it might smell. Those type of messages provide understanding. Dr. Mikesell has done studies and improved scientifically. If you have good communication and have understanding of the scenario from your neighbors, they're more tolerant of odor. So that can go a long way. It's always taking the high road in times of conflict, and explaining and educating neighbors on what's going on, I think, is very important.
And the reason that odors cause such visceral reaction to people is that in the brain, the odor center is tied very closely to emotions and memory. So if you have a good experience with an odor and you smell, apple pie baking, that brings back a flood of emotions and memories that are positive. Manure tends to not do that. It tends to be the opposite. So, there are people that will have a very negative reaction to manure odors for reasons that are embedded in their biology. There's not much that we can do to change that, but we can definitely keep the communication channels open and try to reduce the amount of conflict that we see on the landscape.
Yeah, that overlapping of smell with memory and emotion and experiences, we all experience it different. Everybody's sniffer is unique and very sensitive. So that communication, that being a good neighbor, that image that you present can influence how someone perceives odor that they receive once it's generated at the farm. And that can go quite a long way.
I don't know, maybe I'm odd man out, but anytime I smell a dairy manure, it gives me fond memories of my days spent on the farm growing up.
We're all shaking our head, Brady, because we all agree. But yeah, we're a unique agricultural subset.
Yeah, as Bob was saying that, I was thinking, I was like, every time I smell sheep, I'm always like excited, but yeah, sometimes people think it smells real bad. I guess it would depend on your history with sheep then. So we are talking a little bit about odor and mainly that line of communication, But is there anything that producers can do besides, I guess you kind of already went over by spreading it, when it's going to dry out quicker and doing those sort of things. But is there anything you haven't mentioned that you think would help to control this odor?
One thing that really helps, but it's very expensive to do and not possible in all locations, is to place the manure underground or incorporate it fairly quickly. Now that generates some problems with no-till systems. We really don't have the equipment to get some types of manure underground very easily. It takes a lot of power to do that. It's expensive to apply it that way, but it does reduce odors and conserves nutrients both. So there are places where that's a possibility and it's a really good practice, but there are a lot of places in the state and in the country where that's not possible.
Yeah, for liquid manures, this manure injection technology that Bob's alluding to has come quite a long way in the last 10 years. So we're seeing it adopted more and more at farms, and we see commercial applicators in possession and ownership of this injection equipment. So that can help divvy the costs across many more acres and farms. Our average manure hauler in the state of Pennsylvania works on 38 farms a year. So if they have injection equipment, they might be able to service small acres of farming, farm small acres for manure injection and help you get more bang for buck for that nutrient load, particular conservation of nitrogen.
As we're talking a little bit about that, I think that leads us into this next question I had. That might be a loaded question that I just don't know, but how do you get the most use out of your manure? So should people use it as fertilizer or as a soil amendment? What are your guys' thoughts about how to get the best use out of the manure that you have on your farm?
Well, the best thing somebody can do is to start with the 4R's principles, right? 4R's are the right rate, the right source, the right time, and the right placement of the manure on the landscape. If you follow those 4R principles, that is the basis of a manure management plan. Manure management plans are guiding you in that. So if you explore the manure management plan, you are also doing a good exercise to help utilize your manure nutrients in agronomic and economic value, and also safeguarding the environment.
So I guess my question to you other guys, is that how much money can a producer actually save by managing the manure nutrients correctly? Is it a significant amount of money or is it just a little bit? What financial incentive do they have to manage manure nutrients correctly?
It's hard to put a dollar figure on that because when you dive into the dollar figures of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, we often worry most about nitrogen and phosphorus because those are the ones that cause issues environmentally. But the price of fertilizer, as well as the price of the commodity, right, the hay or corn or whatever you're taking off of that landscape, come into play on the efficiencies. But if you apply the manure when it's more fresher, right? The sooner you apply it, the more nitrogen conservation you're going to have. But then you have to balance that with making sure that you're not going to lose that nitrogen from the field in the form of runoff or leaching, or also volatilization. So there's this leaky system, and we're trying to take advantage by following the 4R principles and applying the manure at the right source, rate, time, and place, so that we can best benefit and kind of place our bets in the right spot so that we're going to conserve the nutrients. The best thing you can do is place it in a manner in which you're not going to lose it. And if you can do that and keep it in the field, then you're going to have the best economic return. You mentioned earlier, Bob, about manure injection helping with odor. That can also help with injection conservation of nitrogen, because by placing liquid manure underneath the soil surface, you will not have as much volatilization. So it keeps it in the soil where it can be accessed by plants. And then a benefit of that is that you don't have to purchase extra fertilizer, on the commercial end, granular or other, to place on the field to make up for the manure that you did not maintain, right? The volatilized nitrogen needs replaced if you want to optimize crop growth. So if you inject it, you're conserving it.
So just to put some numbers on that, so if your crop needs, I don't know, 100 units of nitrogen for that year, and you can apply 50 units of that from manure, then you only have to purchase 50 units from commercial sources. Am I getting that right?
That's right. Right. So we have availability factors in our nutrient management plan, which are pretty reliable on nitrogen availability. The colleague of ours here at Penn State just recently did a study on corn looking at the predictive nitrogen tools that we have and actually using the Penn State agronomy guide incorporated with the availability factors in our nutrient management program, which are also included in balance sheets available with the manure management plan, proved to be the best way in Pennsylvania to get the most predictive value of nitrogen use efficiency.
So you mentioned the agronomy guide. Actually, that's a really good tool and a good read for anybody that's really interested in nutrient management. So good stuff in there.
For sure. We teach nutrient management plan writers, and before their exam, we tell them to read the first 2 chapters in the agronomy guide because that tells them about all the stuff that we try to teach them, but may not have done a great job with. So then they can go back and get a refresher before their exam. And it proved that the people that read that agronomy guide and look into it really have better scores.
You're talking a little bit about, using that manure for fertilizer. And I know of some people and some producers that have been thinking about, or selling their manure for fertilizer. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
The cost of the manure, if you're going to be selling manure or purchasing it, traditionally has been based mostly on the nutrient value compared to the cost of commercial fertilizer. So if you look at what commercial fertilizer nitrogen cost is per unit, you know what the percentage of nitrogen is in the manure that you're considering to purchase, and you can make a dollars to dollars comparison how much that manure is worth to buy. And so there are manure auctions around the country. We have people that sell manure to neighbors, and the pricing is usually based on the nutrient value plus the cost of trucking to get it from one spot to the next.
I'll add to this a little bit too, because really the selling of manure as fertilizer, I mean, that's common practice in Pennsylvania, especially southeast, south central, north central part of the state. And the Act 38 nutrient management program is kind of developed around that principle that there's certain operations that generate more manure than they can utilize, so they have to export it to other operations, and typically they're exporting it and charging for it because other ag operations want that for the fertilizer benefit. There's actually even a growing market currently. It's kind of in its infancy, but they're buying manure from operations and then converting it into an actual licensed fertilizer that is then bagged and sold in stores. That's a bit of a newer technology, maybe an older practice, but I think that the market is starting to make it cost effective now, finally.
A benefit of manure versus commercial fertilizers, you bring in some organic material. So typically we don't price it out on organic matter. It's thought of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium value in the manure going to the crop, but that organic matter that manure brings always adds a benefit to the soil, right? That carbon-based molecule and having immobilized nitrogen and phosphorus in those carbon-based molecules that come in manure actually allow kind of a time release of the nutrient, which is beneficial. And then the carbon in the soil itself builds soil health. And we've heard a lot in the last 10 years about soil health because it is important. And we've seen recent studies where they've shown that cattle grazing and efficiency of growth correlates directly with soil health indicators. So the better your soil is, better the animals that are on that soil do.
So I've heard multiple times in this conversation about testing manure, and maybe I didn't, or not testing manure, but maybe about figuring out the nutrient content. And maybe I missed it, but how would you guys recommend going about either testing or just finding out the nutrient content of your manure? Is there somewhere they can send it or?
Yeah, Maddie, there's a lot of good labs that can analyze the manure, and the best thing to do is take a good sample, a representative sample. Often the best way to get a sample is to sample periodically as you unload a manure storage, whether it's solid or liquid manure. If, for instance, you were going to take 100 loads to the field, you might sample load 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and then mix all those subsamples together into one composite sample, mix it up, and then send that composite sample as a representative of your entire manure storage to the laboratory for analysis. And that will bring back the analysis of nitrogen in both organic and ammonium form. The organic plus ammonium equal the total nitrogen. So it's a fraction, that goes into the total, and those are important to know. It also will give you the phosphorus and potassium, and will give you pH and solid contents of your manure as well. It can be getting your manure sample can pay off, right? If you spend just a couple $20 bills to sample your manure and have it sent off, how many pounds of fertilizer in form of nitrogen or phosphorus does it take to save those $20, right? So if you sample it, it can really pay off economically and agronomically when you put those correct numbers into a manure management plan and do the calculations. Having the actual numbers versus a book value number pays off. So I encourage everybody to sample their manure. And if they want more information on how to sample manure, they can always contact us and we can provide information. We have fact sheets on that, etc.
In your guys' opinion, this is just like kind of just going off to the side, but what is the best way or how should producers store their manure, or should they store their manure? Anything in that sort of
That's a loaded
aspect?
question.
I was gonna say, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't ask that.
Most important thing about manure storage is to make sure it's containing the manure and that you're not having leakage, right? If you have seepage or something leaving the edge of the manure storage, that nutrient is not doing you any good. So you need to make sure you have the right containment. So if you can't have containment, you need to think about how to fix that. And again, our county level districts and NRCS specialists can come and look at any farm and evaluate your manure storage potential, what your current system is, and how it might be improved. We have lots of guidance on that in the state of Pennsylvania, and there's also funding for it across the state in many scenarios. So if someone has a leaky system and they're stacking their manure and they're seeing seepage run off or rainwater run off of it, then they might be able to get some funding to help them fix that. And if they contain it, now they're holding those nutrients until they can get that source, that right source, coupled with the right time to place it correctly on the field and keep those molecules of nutrient for themselves and for their crop instead of leaking in the system. They do no good if they leave the field and don't go to a crop, right? So the manure storage idea is to allow us to implement the 4R practices as we dictate, not as Mother Nature dictates.
So liquid manure storage systems are almost universally engineered and are very, very tight and have leak detection systems and things like that to make sure that those liquids stay where they're supposed to be. Solid manure systems, a little different and are prevalent on most smaller farms, and that's where we can, what spot we pick out to store that manure until it's spread on the field can make a big difference in how many of those nutrients stay put in the pile versus how many run off and leave. And that's probably the biggest place that we can make a difference for retaining nutrients is in those solid piles.
To just kind of build on a little bit what Bob said there, and just to kind of emphasize, talk about liquid manure storage. Is one thing in Pennsylvania that state regulations require all newly constructed liquid manure storages to be certified by a professional engineer. We want to make sure they're built to the current standards to prevent any leaking and that can cause environmental harm. And a lot of what kind of the main concept that surrounds good manure storage practices is the concept of keeping clean water clean. So you want, preventing any clean water maybe from going through a storage, like if it's a stacking area, whatnot, diverting that water around the storage, limiting any downspouts or whatever being directed to a storage. And then if there is any contaminated water coming out of that storage, particularly again for solid stacking, that it's being treated, such as going to the vegetated treatment area. That's kind of a big concept around manure management and nutrient management. They are, at the end of the day, environmental regulations, and that's what it comes down to, is keeping clean water clean.
Yeah, a good manager, right? If we think about our livestock producers, if they see a shoulder on an animal that's rubbed up against the gate and has a small laceration, a good manager is going to take that small problem and address it. If a manager has a problem with their manure, they should look at that and critically evaluate it. And if they have an issue, they should start to address it, right? What's part of good management is you want to see if you have a problem, you want to make it better. And going rogue and building your own storage, sometimes even if it's just a concrete pad, is not always the best idea. You want to try to contact your folks that are specialists at the county level and make sure you're being compliant in what you do, because putting money into something up front that is not approved can lead to more money being spent later, because it can exacerbate the problem and maybe cause an investigation or something to come back for you. So I encourage everybody to continue to work with their specialists. There's lots of professionals out there, and their jobs are to help these type of scenarios and help managers make their systems better.
So I've enjoyed the conversation this far, but we're starting to run out of time. So I normally towards the end of every episode, I try to ask a fun question. I don't know if it's actually fun or not, but I like them, so I'm going to keep doing them. But the one question I wanted to ask that was more fun or more experience-based is, what is the best on-the-job story that you guys have based off of manure or odor management?
One I can think of, and it's not especially hilarious, but it's a good demonstration. There was for some regulated farms that have a high potential of causing odor conflict, we require them to do what we call level 2 best management practices to reduce odor. And one of those level 2s that is used a lot is to plant vegetation, trees around the facility. And those trees will serve to mix and dilute the odor plume as it travels off site and be less likely to reach neighboring homes. So this one gentleman built a pretty good sized poultry operation, planted a bunch of trees around the outside for purposes of reducing odor. And a couple of years later, we went back to check on it, and most of the trees had died. And he replanted a lot of them, and it hadn't worked. And the reason those trees were dead is that the deer really enjoyed rubbing their antlers on those newly planted pine trees. They just thought that was great. And he couldn't keep the deer population low enough to make the trees work. So he had to look for a different best management practice.
Was that in the southern part of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I can't remember. It was Lancaster or Lebanon County, someplace down there.
I was gonna say their deer population is out of control somewhat.
That's a hard question. I've been around too much manure to answer this question very well. But one of the things that came to mind was, a kind of a success story in some of the outreach and education I've been involved with, because I've worked so much with the commercial manure hauling industry that we often talk about safety. And a big component of manure safety are gas concerns. So we always need to think about hydrogen sulfide, CH4 or methane, right? We can have asphyxiation and loss of life around these scenarios with gas. And I had a commercial hauler come up to me one day and tell me that I may have saved his life, because some of the things that I've talked about as far as body reactions to gas exposure, he recognized from our classwork. And in his case, it was that he was getting a headache while he was working with manure. And so he was able to get out of there and get fresh air. And he talked to someone else that he was working with. And that person said, I have a tremendous headache as well, which are signs of hydrogen sulfide exposure. So that made me feel good.
That is very interesting. I guess it always is rewarding when you save a life, right?
We don't know if we actually saved one, but at least at least we help someone stay safer.
Absolutely.
Wow, Rob, it's kind of you put me in a tough spot to follow up with that one. So I guess the one I'll say here is it was a bit comical. So me and my colleague were helping out at the 2015 North American Manure Expo, which Rob has a big hand in annually with that. So this one was held in Pennsylvania, in Chambersburg, PA. And me and my colleague, when we were at the district, we were asked to kind of provide some crowd control whenever they did the manure spreader demonstrations. And it was a bit of a breezy day that day. And, we were having a fun time trying to keep the crowds back from the manure spreaders because for whatever reason, as soon as that manure gets spread on the ground, people want to get as close to that tractor and spreader as possible. Well, whenever the broadcast tanker started spreading, he just saw this brown plume just float over the crowd. It was I think we were standing a little bit to the side, so we didn't get it too badly, but I just saw a lot of people get covered in a fine mist of manure that day.
That reminds me of another quick story, Maddie. One day I was at Bob's farm, and he asked me to get up on the roof of the barn with him to help fix the roof. And we were up there, and the ladder fell over. So now we're stuck on the roof. There was no one else around, so we looked down, and there was the pile of manure. And we figured we better jump off the roof. So Bob jumped first, and I said, "Are you all right?" And he said he was fine. I said, "Well, how deep is it?" And he said, "It's only knee deep." So that sounded pretty good. I jumped off and I winded the manure all the way up to my armpits. And I said, "Bob, I thought you said this was only knee deep." And he said, "Well, it is if you go in head first." Not a true story, but it's good.
Oh, goodness. So that's exactly what I wanted out of that question. So that's perfect. So just to wrap up, is there anything that we haven't covered today or that you think would be positive or educational for the folks who know that we haven't already went over? I didn't ask questions about.
Now, the one thing that I probably should mention on odors is that we've got this atmospheric phenomenon called a thermal inversion. And when that happens, it's usually the mornings or the nights in the fall of the year when fog hangs in the hollows. And when you get those types of atmospheric conditions, odors can be pushed to ground level and travel pretty significant distances without very much dilution. And those types of scenarios can really cause a lot of complaints. The problem is that those types of scenarios are pretty difficult to predict, where you think you've got a situation where you would expect a thermal inversion, you don't always get one. And sometimes you get them in situations that you wouldn't expect. The reason that I found out about this was that when I was a kid, we had some pigs up a narrow hollow behind the house. And about 8 o'clock on summer and fall evenings, you would be in the house and you feel like you're standing in the middle of the pig pen. It would smell like pigs. And that's when those thermal inversions started and pushed that odor downhill. So that's kind of how I became interested in the whole odor thing, and a way that, it's kind of grown legs from there.
From my end, Maddie, a wrap-up thought is I help to teach the Penn State nutrient management class, a formal class at the university. And in that class, we get animal science students, we get plant science students, and they always don't know each other's world, right? So a lot of people that listen to this podcast are going to be great animal people, but they may not have experience and a lot of knowledge on that manure management, environmental water quality, air quality, or even cropping in. So the good news is we have experts on all of that. If you don't know and you have an issue, ask. We have lots of resources. We've talked about those today. You can always reach out and find some help.
That's exactly what I was going to hit on there, Rob. It's just there's a lot of resources out there. regarding manure management, odor management. A lot of great experts and knowledge. We've mentioned it several times, so I'll mention it again one last time. Your local county conservation district or local Penn State Extension, they are amazing resources when it comes to this information. They're the boots on the ground. They're the ones who'll go out to your farm and assist producers with any of these related concerns.
Sweet. Well, I would like to thank you guys for your time spent today. Talk to you guys later.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was fun.
Well, I hope you guys found as much enjoyment and information out of today's episode as I did. Again, we'd like to thank our guests for being on the podcast today. And if you would like a little bit more information about them, go ahead and drop down into the show notes below. I have linked their bio as well as any other resources or websites that we have talked about on this episode today. As always, if you have any questions about manure management or odor management or any other topic associated with livestock, go ahead and reach out to your local livestock educator or visit extension.psu.edu. You can tune in for our next episode on August 6th. But until then, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you later.